It was a cold winter night, the kind of night when the streets were quiet and the snow fell so heavily it swallowed the sound of footsteps, and Claire had just returned home from another long day at work when she noticed something unusual outside her apartment building, a man sitting on the steps, with a little girl wrapped tightly in a worn pink coat, her small face peeking out from a nest of curly blonde hair, and the man, his arms around her, looked exhausted yet determined, as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, but refused to break under it, and in that moment Claire's heart stirred because she could not imagine a child spending a night in the biting cold. So without hesitation she asked softly if they needed help, and when the man tried to decline politely, she could see in his eyes that he had no other choice, so she insisted they come inside just for one night where it was warm, safe, and filled with the little comforts every human being deserved. Inside, the air filled with warmth and the faint smell of coffee, and the little girl, Lily, immediately brightened, cuddling into the blanket Claire gave her while sipping on hot cocoa with both tiny hands, and her father, Ethan, sat quietly, his gratitude unspoken but heavy in the air, and though Claire asked nothing of him, she could not help but wonder what kind of struggle had brought a man like him, who carried himself with quiet dignity, to be sitting outside in the snow, and when she gently asked, he only said he was doing his best to raise his daughter on his own, that life had been challenging but he would endure anything for her smile, and Claire admired the humility in his voice, the strength hidden behind his silence, and she felt something stir inside her, a recognition of resilience, the kind of strength not found in wealth or status but in love and sacrifice. They spoke into the late hours, not much, but enough for her to see the kind of man he was, and she found herself laughing when little Lily, with her sweet innocence, told stories about imaginary adventures, and even Ethan smiled more than he probably had in weeks, and for a brief moment the small apartment was filled with a sense of family, something Claire hadn't felt in a long time, something she didn't even realize she was missing. And as the night grew deeper, Ethan tried to apologize for being a burden, but she silenced him with kindness, telling him no one was a burden when they were simply in need of help. And though he didn't say much more, she could see the relief in his eyes, the kind of relief that comes when someone finally lets their guard down. By morning, Ethan gathered their few belongings, preparing to leave with a quiet determination, and though Claire wanted to ask them to stay longer, she held back, simply handing Lily a small package of food and gloves for the cold, and Ethan's eyes softened as he whispered thank you, a thank you heavy with meaning, one that carried more weight than words ever could. And with that he and his daughter disappeared into the snowy streets, leaving Claire with an emptiness she could not explain, as though she had just experienced something profound but fleeting, something that had already slipped away from her grasp. Several days later at work, Claire's company buzzed with news. A new CEO was taking charge, someone mysterious, someone who would change everything, and she, like everyone else, stood in the crowded hall waiting to see the man who would now lead them, and when he stepped onto the stage her breath caught in her throat because standing there in a sharp-tailored suit was Ethan, the same man she had let into her apartment, the man she thought was just a struggling single father, and though his presence was commanding, though he now radiated authority and power, his eyes found hers in the crowd, and for a split second it felt as though time froze, the recognition passing silently between them, the memory of that night now a secret they alone shared. Claire's heart raced as she tried to reconcile the man she had known with the image before her, the one who held his daughter in the cold verses, the one now holding the future of an entire company, and she realized then how little we truly know about the strangers we pass, how appearances never tell the full story, and more importantly how kindness, even when given blindly, has the power to touch lives in ways we cannot imagine, because her simple decision to open her door had connected her to someone she would now see every day, someone who had the power to change her own path forever. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to transform the company, not only with bold ideas and leadership, but with a human touch, a compassion that set him apart, and though he was the CEO, he never forgot the woman who had given him shelter on that freezing night, and he treated Claire with a quiet respect, often seeking her opinion, often letting his gaze linger on her just a little longer than necessary, and though they never spoke of that night openly, the bond between them deepened with every unspoken glance, every shared smile, every quiet moment that reminded them of where it all began. Rumors swirled among the employees, whispers of something unspoken between the new CEO and the woman in the office, but no one knew the truth. No one knew that their connection had started long before the boardrooms and meetings, in the silence of a snowy night when humanity triumphed over pride. When compassion bridged the gap between strangers, and as the days turned into months, Claire realized that what had begun as an act of kindness was becoming something far greater. A partnership not just of circumstance but of fate, and Ethan, though a man of immense responsibility, showed her that beneath all the titles and power, he was still the same father who would sit in the cold all night just to keep his daughter safe. And that was the man she was falling for. This story is a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary moments hide the beginnings of extraordinary journeys, that opening your door to someone in need can open your heart to possibilities you never imagined, and that love, destiny, and second chances often come quietly, without warning, on nights when the world seems coldest. But with a single act of kindness, the world shifts, and life is never the same again. A cold winter night always has its own silence, the kind that makes you reflect on your own life. And for Claire, it was just another evening returning home from her office. Tired, her mind full of work deadlines and the routine of her day. But as she reached her apartment door, she noticed something unusual. A man sitting quietly on the doorstep with a little girl curled into his arms, both of them surrounded by the cruel bite of winter air. The little girl's cheeks red from the cold, her small coat clearly not enough to protect her from the icy winds, and in that instant Claire's heart softened, for she knew what it meant to struggle, and she could not walk past them without doing something, so she approached gently, asking if they were all right, her voice carrying both concern and kindness, and though the man tried to assure her they would be fine, his weary eyes and trembling daughter betrayed the truth, and in that moment Claire decided not to leave them there. She invited them inside, telling him it would only be for one night, just until the snowstorm passed, and after a moment of hesitation he finally agreed, whispering a quiet thank you as he carried his daughter into the warmth of her apartment. Once inside, the change in the little girl was immediate, her eyes lighting up at the warmth, at the blanket Claire draped over her, at the cup of cocoa she held with both tiny hands as if it were the greatest treasure in the world, and her father, though quiet, exhaled deeply as if for the first time in a long while he could finally breathe, and Claire, while moving around the kitchen preparing something simple to eat, stole glances at him, noticing the way he carried himself, not like a broken man, but like one who was holding himself together for the sake of his child, his posture steady, his gaze thoughtful, and though he spoke little, every word seemed chosen with care, every smile for his daughter filled with a love that needed no explanation, and she began to wonder who he really was. What story lay behind the man who now sat in her living room? They talked only in fragments that night, just enough for her to know his name was Ethan, and his daughter's name was Lily, and when she asked where he lived, he only said things had been difficult lately, that raising a daughter alone left little room for comfort, and Claire did not push further, because she could see the pride in his voice, the dignity of a man who would rather endure hardship than complain. And though the story seemed simple, there was something about him that did not fit, as if there was more hidden beneath the surface, something he was not ready to share, and yet she respected it, offering instead the comfort of silence, the comfort of being safe for one night without questions or judgment. As the night grew deeper, little Lily fell asleep on the couch, her tiny breath steady, her face peaceful in a way that melted Claire's heart, and Ethan carefully adjusted her blanket before leaning back, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, and Claire noticed how he fought to stay awake, as if even in rest he could not allow himself to be vulnerable, and she said softly that he should rest too, that they were safe here, and for a moment he looked at her with a gratitude so deep it needed no words, and in that silence something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of souls who, the strangers, understood each other's burdens. Morning came, and with it the harsh reality that kindness has limits, for Ethan was determined not to impose any longer, and despite Claire's quiet hope that they might stay another night, he gathered their things, preparing Lily for the cold once again, And when Claire handed them a small bag of food and gloves for Lily, Ethan's eyes softened in a way she would never forget, his voice breaking slightly as he thanked her, and though he said no more, she could feel the weight of his promise that her kindness would not be forgotten. And with that, he and his daughter stepped out into the snowy streets, leaving Claire with a strange ache in her chest, as though she had let go of something that mattered more than she realized. Days passed and life moved on, until one morning everything changed, the office buzzing with whispers of a new CEO taking over, someone powerful, someone the company had placed all their hopes in, and like everyone else, Claire stood in the crowded hall waiting for the announcement, her heart beating with curiosity, and when he walked in, tall, composed, his presence filling the room, Claire's breath caught in disbelief, because standing there in a sharp-tailored suit was Ethan, the same man she had sheltered, the same father who had sat outside her apartment with his daughter in the cold, and while the employees applauded, awed by their new leader, Claire stood frozen, unable to reconcile the man she knew with the figure before her, until his eyes found hers in the crowd, and for a moment the noise faded, the room stilled, and it was just the two of them locked in recognition, bound by a secret night only they shared. From that day forward, everything shifted, because though Ethan was now the CEO, commanding and confident, he never forgot the woman who had shown him kindness when she believed he had nothing, and though they never spoke openly of that night, his gaze often lingered on her in meetings, his respect for her clear in the way he sought her opinion, his gratitude alive in every smile that passed between them, and Claire began to see that the bond they shared was not an accident but fate, a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of compassion plant the seeds for the greatest changes in our lives, and as weeks turned into months, the quiet respect between them grew into trust, and trust into something deeper, something that could no longer be ignored. The employees whispered, rumors spread, but no one knew the truth. No one knew that their connection had been born not in the glitter of corporate power, but in the silent snow of a winter night, when a woman chose to open her door to a father and his daughter, unaware that act of kindness would return to her in the most extraordinary way, and Claire came to realize that life's greatest stories do not begin with grand gestures, but with small moments, with a choice to care when no one else would, and Ethan, though a man of great power, showed her again and again that he was still the father who would give up everything for his daughter, the man who, on that cold night, revealed the heart that made him truly great, and it was that heart she had fallen in love with. And so their story became one of destiny, shaped not by wealth or status, but by humanity, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts arrive unannounced, on nights when the world seems darkest, but with a single act of kindness, the light of love begins to shine, and nothing is ever the same again.